Hi, this is a chronological Bible study in 1 year with Heath and Holly. Say hello, Holly.
Hello, everyone.
Isn't she the cutest? Okay, so let's turn the webcam off because we're going to let people look at the slides.
Alrighty.
Okay, I think we're on the slides, and now I'm going to go to the next slide to celebrate that we're making progress. If you're on the Bible Caravan with us, you have successfully completed a week and a half, which you can see that little blue slice. It's going to keep getting bigger as the year goes on. So what's coming up for days 10 through 16? Well, we're still in Genesis, and we're continuing in the tale of Jacob. And we continue into Joseph uniting with his brothers in Egypt. They are the sons of Jacob, also known as the sons of Israel. We also have some bits from First Chronicles, which are genealogies which correspond with the people described in this time. And it's a couple generations, so generations 22 to 24. And we get this King's List, which maybe is 8 generations. There's no dates with it, so we don't really know. And we do have a new name of God coming up in this section, El Elohe Yisrael, the mighty God of Israel. So that's kind of the overview. When you look at the breakdown of what's being read, most days you're just reading Genesis, but there's some First Chronicles sprinkled in there.
I also like how you say how long it's going to be.
Oh, yeah, we'll go back
That's
here.
really cool.
Yeah, so how many minutes do you have? It's only 90 minutes. You can do this in 1 week.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And that's 90 minutes if you're listening to us blather and mispronounce names and places. You could obviously read it for yourself and probably do it faster. But, we don't really care how you do it. We're just on this virtual journey together. So we're going to, I'm in the right slide. We're going to talk about how these readings, how do they relate to the Gospels, because that's our center of the universe. This is the OneGospel channel, after all, on YouTube. And so Genesis 33, 18 to 19 describes Jacob's purchase of land, and we learn about Jacob's well in John 4. So it's interesting that the fact that Joseph bequeathed the land to Joseph specifically is only referenced in the Greek version of Genesis 48:22, but not in the Hebrew version. But that is described in our gospel, John 4:5. Did you want to read any of those verses? It's okay if we don't, but that's just to me, I normally save the questions to the end, but because this is a reference in the gospel that's kind of, I thought interesting, I do a little italicized question. What is the implications of this? So, Holly, did you want to read any of that?
Yeah, I actually have Genesis 33, 18 through 19 up.
Okay.
Then Jacob came safely to the city of Shechem, which is in the land of Canaan, when he came from Paddan Aram, and he pitched his tent before the city. And he bought the parcel of land where he had pitched his tent from the children of Hamor, Shechem's father, for 100 pieces of money.
I like it.
Yeah. I can go on to John 4 if you want.
Yeah, go ahead.
John 4:5. So he came to the city of Samaria, which is called Sychar, near the plot of ground that Jacob gave to his son Joseph.
Okay. And Did you want to read Genesis 48:22?
I can. I don't know if you said it's the Greek version of this.
Well, you can read the English version, which is based on the Hebrew.
Alrighty, because I don't know Greek. Let's see this. 48, verse 22. Moreover, I have given to you one portion above your brothers, which I took from the hand of the Amorite with my sword and my bow.
Okay. So in Genesis 48:22, the English translation of the Greek version, it says, I give to thee Sycamore, which is Shechem in sort of the transliteration of the Greek letters. So I give to thee Sycamore, a select portion above thy brethren, which I took out of the hand of the Amorites with my sword and bow. So John 4:5 is referencing something that's not found in the Hebrew text, but is found in the Greek version of Genesis. So what do you think the implication of this is, Holly?
I don't know. I want to hear what you have to say about it.
Okay. It means that there's information in the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the law and the prophets, also called the Old Testament. There is information from that Greek translation which is actually true, accurate, and correct. And just because it's different from the Hebrew doesn't mean it's wrong, as proven by the gospel writer in John, because he quotes it as being real. You with me on that?
I am.
Okay.
You said that so eloquently.
Oh, I blush. So the the next reference in the Gospels in Jesus's genealogies, Tamar, who is part of a somewhat uncomfortable story that's not generally talked about in Sunday school class. Genesis 38:6-26. Tamar is one of the few females found in Jesus' genealogy. So I just kind of asked that, rhetorical question, what might be a reason for this? There's no answer to that question. So if you don't want to say anything, Holly, we'll just move on to the next slide.
I could read the story if you want.
No, we're not going to read
All right,
this
we'll let
story,
them do
'cause
it on their
that's part
own.
of the reading
I know,
that
but
they're
you
going
referenced
to
it.
do.
All right.
Okay. So I do have some questions that you might think about as you drive. As you read.
You might be driving.
You may be driving
listening.
while you listen to us read. You can do that as long as you're careful. So these are some questions. Genesis 28:12. What is the ladder in Jacob's dream? And I specifically tell you to reference John 1:51. So that's a question to keep in mind. Genesis 28:14-15. Yahweh appears to Jacob and reaffirms his covenant with Abraham. And so the open question is, why might this have been said? And then in Genesis 29:27-28, we see that a week can be a 7-year period of time. And so that actually becomes important when you read Daniel 9, when you're trying to interpret what those weeks are. Genesis 30:23, Rachel felt scorn for not having children. This continued to the time of Jesus, when Elizabeth felt shame. And the reference to that is Luke 1:25. And so, the question of, is that fair? I think we know kind of the answer to that, but there is potentially, some insight into that. And then finally, Genesis 36. So you're going to see how, this guy named Esau is also named Edom, and it evolves from a man to a family, the family of Esau, to an entire ethnic group that by that point had developed dukes and chiefs. And that's just 2 generations from Esau. And that's given in detail. And that evolution continues later, because by Exodus 15, when the children of Israel are crossing the Red Sea, there was a single king just 40 years after that. So we see that it went from a man to a family to like a clan that had leaders but not a formal king to actually having a monarch. And that was only a few generations later. So I guess the original dukes or chiefs likely died, and it was their successors who had experienced some kind of concentration of power. And Israel went through this same pattern hundreds of years later, and they were specifically warned about not having a king. So do you think the story of Esau and Edom might have been a word picture of warning to the Israelites? That is that's a very leading question on my part, yet it is a rhetorical question. We still have more questions. Look at
we
this.
We do.
Holly.
We go on and on.
Oh my god.
That was a deep one too.
Oh, thank you. I'm deep. So, more questions. Genesis 37:36. Potiphar was an officer, but the word for officer can also mean eunuch, which is a term associated with castrated men in later times. And I reference Isaiah 56, and that's not a question. That's just a statement. But I guess the unanswered question is, do you think this was an evolution over time, or do you think that also the priests of Egypt may have suffered similar indignities? He did have a wife, but that doesn't mean he had children. Doesn't mean he had children, though. Eunuchs can, they can't reproduce, but that doesn't mean that they cannot engage in, relations.
Something every day. You learn something every day. I didn't know that.
You learn something every day. There we go. Genesis 38:6-10. This is part of the law as given through Moses later, and so I give you a reference in Deuteronomy. So this is an open question that you can think about as you're reading in Genesis. How much of the law given through Moses was actually known by God's people in generations past? And what does that mean about the law given through Moses? Was it something given specifically at that time, or was it something that was actually reaffirmed that had existed but maybe had been forgotten by the children of Israel? Genesis 41:8. Egypt's magicians had occult powers. And, they're mentioned first in Genesis 41:8, but later they have occult powers as described in Exodus 7-8. And the magicians were the same group in Babylon that Daniel was a member of. And the magicians, also called magi, are presented as wise, pious men in Matthew, but swindlers in Acts 8-9. So this is a nice open-ended question to think about. What do you think about that? What do you do with this concept of the magi first referenced in Egypt in Genesis 41:8? More questions. Joseph interprets dreams because the Spirit of God is within him, similar to Daniel. So this is a rhetorical question. Should Christians seek interpretations from any of their dreams? Is that appropriate or not? Genesis 42:18, Joseph fears God, something prescribed by Jesus. So Jesus says, fear God. Paul says, fear God. And Peter says, fear God. So this is clearly something that is a theme that continues. And so I think it's a good reflecting point of, what does it mean to fear God? What is the good part? What is it that you should be doing? So those are my questions to think about as you undergo your ongoing reading. I always encourage you every week to help me make this study better. So pass on important cross-references I didn't provide. Give me feedback on making the chronological sequence better. I kind of pointed out a few that I thought would help. and then give me questions that I didn't think of. And there are ways, you could send me a message through YouTube, or if you know me locally, I'm easy to find. So Holly chose a question from our list of questions last week that she wants to talk about. So I'm going to read the question, and then I'm going to say, take it away, Holly. So Genesis 14:20. This is my question. This is the first recorded tithe. Tithing is proscribed by the Torah, and I give some references, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, so lots of references. And it's seemingly endorsed by Jesus. I gave you 2 references there. So then I asked the open question is, what is the role of tithing in Christian life? And take it away, Holly.
All right. So I thought we could read these verses, if that's okay.
Oh, you read whatever verses you need, babes.
Genesis, I'm going to backtrack just slightly to Genesis 14:18. Then Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. He was the priest of God Most High, and he blessed him and said, Blessed be Abram of God Most High, a possessor of heaven and earth, and blessed be God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand. And he gave him a tithe of all. So that was our first recorded tithe. Then we read in Leviticus 27:30 through 33. And all the tithe of the land, whether of the seed of the land or of the fruit of the tree, is the Lord's. It is holy to the Lord. If a man wants at all to redeem any of his tithes, he shall add 1/5 to it. And concerning the tithe of the herd or the flock, or whatever passes under the rod, the 10th one shall be holy to the Lord. He shall not inquire whether it is good or bad, nor shall he exchange it. And if he exchanges it at all, then both it and the one exchanged for it shall be holy. It shall not be redeemed. And then we looked at Numbers 18, 21 to 31. Behold, I have given the children of Levi all the tithes in Israel as an inheritance, in return for the work which they perform, the work of the tabernacle of meeting. Hereafter the children of Israel shall not come near the tabernacle of meeting, lest they bear sin and die. But the Levites shall perform the work of the tabernacle of the meeting, and they shall bear their iniquity. And it shall be a statute forever, throughout your generations, that among the children of Israel they shall have no inheritance. For the tithes of the children of Israel, which they offer up as a heave offering to the Lord, I have given to the Levites as an inheritance. Therefore I have said to them among the children of Israel, they shall have no inheritance. I'm going to stop right there at 25. And further on, we read about tithing in Deuteronomy 12:5 through 18, 14, 22 to 29, 26, 12 through 15. And then it's seemingly endorsed, like Heath said, in his question in Luke 11. So I'm going to go ahead and read that. Luke 11.
This is Jesus speaking.
Verse 42. This is where your ears perk up. But woe to you, Pharisees, for you tithe mint and rue and all manner of herbs, and pass by justice and the love of God. These you ought to have done without leaving the others undone. And then, let's see here, Matthew 23:23. Similar. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you pay tithe of mint and anise and cumin, and have neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice and mercy and faith. These you ought to have done without leaving the others undone.
I'm turning the camera back on.
So,
since we don't need to look at the slide anymore.
Okay. So, what is the role of tithing in Christian life? So, what I think is is that, number one, God commands us to tithe. So if he tells us to tithe, we should do it because God knows better than we do. And I came up with a verse that wasn't mentioned by Heath that I thought I would read out loud from Malachi, chapter 3, 8 through 12. Would anyone rob God? Yet you are robbing me. But you say, how have we robbed you? In tithes and offering. You are cursed with a curse, for you are robbing me, the entire nation of you. Bring the whole tithe into the storehouse, so that there may be food in my house. And put me to test now in this, says the Lord of armies. If I do not open for you the window of heaven, and pour out for you a blessing, until it overflows, then I will rebuke the devourer for you, so that it will not destroy the fruit of your ground, nor will the vine in the field prove fruitless to you, says the Lord of armies. All the nations will call you blessed, for you will be a delightful land, says the Lord of armies. So, I think that God wants us to tithe. I believe that everything that we have, God has given us. So he is, we should be doing that to honor God. And in a sense, it's part of our worship of him as well. Now, number 2, I think that tithing shows God that he is 100% of your heart and that your eyes are on him. So in a very tangible way, you're showing God that you're all in. And I have a nice little quote here from the German reformer Martin Luther, who observed that in a Christian's life, there are 3 conversions necessary: the conversion of heart, the mind, and the purse. So I thought I'd give you a very short story of my history of tithing, but I can say how that it has affected me personally. That when I was young and dumb and not managing my finances very well, my future husband-to-be helped me figure things out. And the first thing that he said to me when we put together a plan was, you're going to tithe 10%. And not as an order, just like this is what you ought to do. And since then, that's what we've done, what we've ought to do. Whether we were young students and me just in the working field or further on in our careers, we feel that we're supposed to do this. And we teach it to our children, and we teach it to the little kids in our Sunday school class, the very basics of what you're supposed to do. And then lastly, I feel like tithing just also shows your missional heart, that the idea of where your treasure is where your heart's going to be, and that where you kind of putting your money where your mouth is kind of idea, that you're giving to your community of believers to help others, whether it's through the functioning of the church, whether it's through missionary activities, whether it's ministering to widows or those that are needy in our congregation. I think that it shows that this is things that we ought to do. So what do you think, Mr. Mackley over there?
I have no idea what Holly was going to say. She gets my slides, but I don't get hers. So she just says stuff, and I get to hear it for the first time with you. So I appreciate your words, Holly. I think that's very sweet. I think your heart is right. I have a maybe a wider view of tithing. For me, tithing pre-existed before the giving of the Mosaic Law, but it wasn't clearly an ongoing thing. It's given to us as like one moment in time. And whereas in the Mosaic Law, it was meant to be systematic, but they had a priesthood that was there to collect the tithes, and that was to support the priests, but it was also meant to be a social welfare system. It was meant to it was meant for there to be reserves for the poor, but it was all voluntary. People weren't arrested for not tithing. There was no actual penalty for not tithing. God said, you're to tithe. But unlike other things, like if you steal, you pay a penalty. If you kidnap someone, you pay a penalty, etc. If you were to blaspheme God, that was a capital offense. So there were penalties not just against people, but against God. But there was no penalty for not tithing. But tithing was for the good of the community, and it was something that should be done. And if you fast forward to Malachi, which Holly chose to quote, that was that was in the Second Temple period. So the first temple was destroyed. The people of Israel and Judah were exiled. Some of them returned. Some of the poor never left, but some of them returned. They started referring to themselves as Jews at that point, and they built a temple, and Malachi, who may be the last prophet of the Old Testament era, makes, God is speaking and says that, it was at that point, because they were in a covenant, they had renewed the covenant when they returned, that they were to pay. And he didn't actually threaten them with a penalty as much as he's promised them a blessing. And, the original covenant, which would have included tithing, God said, if you follow this covenant, you'll have these blessings. And if you don't, you'll have these cursings. So there was blessings tied to the larger covenant, but here in Malachi, he makes a point of saying that, my house needs to have bread in it. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that was just for the priests. I think that was to support the priests, but it was also meant to be a social welfare system. And that system existed until the time of Jesus and one generation after, before it was destroyed. And so Jesus speaks to the Pharisees who were like, hey, you're so proud that you're tithing everything, including the garden herbs that you're growing. Well, yeah, you should do that, but there's these more important things you should be doing too. So when I said he seemingly endorses it, there is a little bit of a context where who's he talking to? He's talking to Pharisees, the people who are following the Mosaic law in their minds, and he is chastising them for their hypocrisy. But he is saying that they should indeed tithe, and that goes back to Malachi. But we're not aware of any actual either Jesus, Paul, Peter, etc., from that era saying that Christians should tithe. We don't see that positive thing. In fact, what we see from Jesus is that you should give everything to him. There's no giving him half. So when he says to the Pharisees, you should be tithing, I don't think that's where he was setting the bar with his disciples or the people around him. So Holly is right, though. It is a reflection of, what you give is a reflection of what you value. And, whether you value holding on to what you have or whether you value sharing. For a purpose that you view as within God's will. And so I've always felt that tithing is a good starting point. But I've never felt like, oh, look at me, because really he wants it all. That doesn't mean he wants you to sell everything you have and give it to the local church, although he might tell you to do that. I'm not saying he's not. But at the same time, you need to be listening to know what you should be doing. Mm-hmm. And that's in every day. That's not just when you get paid, figure out what you're going to give. So I do think tithing it's a good principle that is, I'm going to say that's eternal, or at least it's across the entire scope of time that the Bible covers. But neither am I, and I don't like this term, but I'll use it anyway, neither am I legalistic about it. So the last thing I'll say is that in earlier American life, when they were not taxing your income, there was a social safety net that was through free will offerings to generally churches, but they were, there was a sense of charity for the good of the community. And the churches they're still involved in that, but very little, because the government has gone from minimally taxing its subjects to requiring much more than Egypt required of its people. When you read Genesis, you'll see that. But yes, you're paying much more than the Egyptians did to Pharaoh in exchange for their lives. And not that I'm getting political, this is historical as far as an explanation, but the use of the tithe in the time from Jesus before that was not just to take care of the priesthood, but it was to act as a backstop for public charity. And because of the current political situation, which is not going away, it does change. It doesn't change the concept of tithing at all, but it does change the context of tithing. It's not what it used to be. And there's very few people and communities that could really do it the way they did it before. It's possible, but it's pretty rare. So that's probably more than you expected to hear. What do you think, Holly?
I think so. Yeah, it's a whole lot.
We just went completely off the rails there. Again, she I didn't know what she was going to say, and then she asked me what I think, and she had no idea what I was going to say.
Well, and it is an interesting question because, people feel different ways about tithing, and I just thought that it would be something neat to discuss what the Bible says about it.
It is something neat to discuss. I asked the question because it's interesting to discuss. And here we did. We just discussed it. And, it's okay if you, dear listener, have a completely different opinion. But I think we would all agree that when you get to the time of Jesus, what does he ask of his disciples? He wants it all.
Yep.
And so I don't think, that's pretty clear. I think we'll all agree on that. But what that means to you, the individual, that is up between you and the following of the Spirit.
Yeah, to your discernment.
Oh, Holly, I think I'm going to go off the webcam again. All right, I think I'm back on the slide. And look, I have a picture. And it says, see you next week. Oh, dear readers and listeners, it was a pleasure spending time with you. And hopefully we'll be live soon, but we keep having to travel on the actual Friday at 7 o'clock when this is going to drop. But I look forward to your time again. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.